Okay, let's start this thing.
Alrighty.
Starting it is always the hardest part.
I know.
I gotta be like. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ultra Game Bros. I know I always say that every episode is a special episode, but today is another special episode. And today I'm joined by Ben.
Hi.
Ben. Today we are finally, after the people have been asking us, we've been dodging around the topic because it's like, well, let's not talk about that because we'll talk about it on the pod. Today we are starting our journey in talking about Resident Evil.
Resident Evil.
Thank you. I think it goes without saying, for the people that know us, but for the people that don't know us personally, Resident Evil is basically been in my favorite series, and several Resident Evil games made their way onto our top games list, and like I think I have maybe 2 or 3 in my top 10, perhaps at least 2.
I have 2 for sure.
Yeah.
Top 20, I have like 4.
Yes.
Yeah, 4 in my top 20.
So, yeah, Resident Evil, big game for us, and now we finally get to talk about it.
It's been asked for, begged for by the audience, and now we can finally bring it out.
And it's very weird too because Ben and I discussed this, but we already know mostly how we feel on things, but maybe we'll uncover some stuff, and it'll be nice to at least share it to the world.
We're planning on having the biggest, most accurate Resident Evil conversation on the internet.
Yes.
So this is your one-stop shop. This 3-part series that we're doing of Resident Evil 0 through 3, which is today, and then we're doing the Megasode, the one that everyone's been asking for, the Resident Evil 4 episode, where we talk about everything from the remake to the original, just everything that makes Resident Evil 4 amazing, and then the final episode will be everything after that, mainly focusing on 7. But
everything else. Yeah. I guess actually, a place I want to start that you might not have expected is how did our joined love for the series become known amongst each other? Because that I kind of have a foggy memory on how that even happened.
Well,
Anyway.
I mean, our love of Resident Evil 4 is like an aura around us, like a
You can
stench.
sense it. You can sense it on
you
people.
can
Like,
sense from a mile away. So I think that must have just come up many times as we interacted briefly in high school and stuff like that. But
well, we weren't that tight in high school. This must have been like the year or the year after we graduated.
Well, the first time we hung out, Silent Hill 2 was kind of the main thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is good.
At Graham's house.
We were at Graham's house, who at the time was my neighbor. And Ben was like, he was flexing his gamer skills to all the kiddos that were there, which we were kiddos at the time. This must have been freshman year, sophomore year?
Yeah, probably sophomore year of high school.
Did you bring the game or did Graham?
Of course I did. I brought the whole setup.
Except for
I knew
one thing.
the memory card.
Yeah.
Because I was playing on a no-death run, and if you die in Silent Hill 2, it goes back to the title screen. So if you haven't saved, game over. So I didn't bring a memory card.
And you were getting a little nervous. And you were putting on a good show. People were, there was laughs. The people were crying.
Claps.
Yes.
Applause.
So the crowd was getting a little weary, Ben said. And I don't even think we were friends at the point. We just kind of knew of each other. So I said, I have a memory card. So we hopped on some bicycles, rode to my house. And
Ryan left me in his driveway as he went inside to find the memory card, left me out
we just
for
live in an
20 minutes probably.
Dangerous neighborhood too, so
there were cars
safe.
coming by, they were looking at me, sizing me up. It was getting a little sketchy out there.
So that was probably one of the first times that I kind of clued you in that I was
fellow gamer.
Yes. Although, it was probably known, but the fact that I was able to just run upstairs and grab one of the 40 memory cards that I had in a bin to just bring one over. I don't even know if I got that one back.
So that'd be a fun one to load up the save.
Yeah, or be like, Graham, dig up all the PS2 memory cards you have. If there's a Silent Hill 2 save on there, it belongs to me. Yeah, it belongs to me. So
probably in the hospital because that's where I died. That's the one save I made, was in the hospital.
Okay, so yeah, explain how your run went. Where did we run to get the memory card? Where were you getting nervous?
We were entering the hospital. I forget the Brookhaven Hospital in Silent Hill 2. And I wanted to shoot Mary just to see what would happen. And I went in the hospital and I'm like, I don't want to try this for sure. So
and the people were cheering.
Yeah, they're like, do it.
And you're there like,
I'm like, I've never done that. So we went and got the memory card.
Okay.
We saved. I shot her. Died. Game over.
Oh.
I'm like, close call. And then I beat the game. You know, people kept coming from across the street, down the road, coming down in the it was packed.
Yes, right.
I could barely hold the controller anymore.
Right.
So squeezed in.
Yeah. And you did it in one sitting. That was like,
of course,
Silent
Hill 2 is
2.5 hours.
It might be less than that. I don't think Silent Hill 2 is very long. Like when I think of a speedrun game, it's like Resident Evil 4 is probably around a 2.5 hour run if you know what you're doing, you know where everything is.
So happenstance, we become gamer friends. Jasmine actually was the one who was like, hey, I know that Ben guy. You'd be good friends with that Ben guy. And I was like, I really don't like him. He's kind of a loser.
I don't think he even knows where Lewis is.
Yes, right. But no. The day that cemented the kinship was we were at my parents' house, my then house, and hanging out playing Rocket League and whatever was going on in 2015 or 14 or whatever that was. Probably 15.
Yeah.
And it just kind of happened where it's like Resident Evil 4, and we just kind of put on. We were on YouTube, looking up speedruns of random games, and put on Resident Evil 4, and we were just watching Resident Evil 4 speedruns and just other junk on YouTube till like 3 a.m. And that's where we kind of picked each other's brains and figured out that we both liked it.
Yeah, it's like, do you know Ditman?
Yes.
Have you met him? I know him.
Right.
But we'll get into RE4 later.
Yeah, we'll save that. Anyway, that's kind of our thing. Resident Evil basically comes up anytime we're in the same room, anytime we're talking about anything gaming related or whatever. Kicking it off, let's talk about Resident Evil 1.
Resident Evil.
1996. PS1. Ben gave some lore in the previous episode that Resident Evil 1 was supposed to be first person, which I don't think I knew.
Yeah, it was, and then you know what happened. You go play a first-person shooter on PlayStation 1, you'll see how good that ran. So
yeah, like
they made the right decision not going with first person.
Resident Evil 1, I think, is a game that does not get enough credit these days.
On PS1, absolutely not.
Yeah, it's very easy to look at clips of it online and listen to the goofy voice acting, look at the crusty graphics or whatever, which aren't really that bad, to be honest, for the PS1, and make fun of it. But I really think that I was super surprised when I replayed it a year or two ago, whenever that was, at how good it still is and how impressive it is to hold up these days.
I mean, if you look at least the formula up until Resident Evil 4, they're all just iteration on the original game. And starting from that point and just doing everything near perfect, and you can argue make it better as the series went on, but RE1 is just a true survival horror like masterpiece. Nothing has really come close to that in that genre.
Right. And it's kind of weird that it is coined with being the game that coined survival horror as a genre.
The Godfather of
survival
horror.
But it's not the first one.
Yeah, that's like Alone in the Dark.
Yeah.
Or Sweet Home, which Resident Evil is a remake sort of
that is a
that
Capcom game?
Yes.
Sweet Home is?
So that was on the Super Famicom.
Well, it was on the original Famicom.
Oh, that was
so
Super, but
Japan only.
Yeah, it's that was supposed to be like a remake, but then Shinji Mikami was like, I want to do my own spin, my own little twist on it. And then he created one of the biggest franchises of all time.
Yeah. Oops.
That he has always tried to get away from up till RE4 when he finally actually left.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't want anything to do with RE2. Okay, fine. I don't want anything to do with Code Veronica. Okay. RE4, maybe I'll do it.
Yeah, he got locked in the dungeons at Capcom
and then they let him out, and then they realized, oh wait, that's why these games were good.
Yeah. Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil Remake, which we'll talk about, obviously. I think as far as game structure is of the best examples out there for how to structure a game. just to be like a short little bite where your brain doesn't wander and you're not thinking like, well, what about this topic they didn't explore in the game, or what about this or that, or what if I could do this? Like, it pretty much has all bases covered. The original does, until the remake says, well, maybe we could expand in this area and maybe we could tighten up this here. But
maybe we could do everything better.
Yes,
and it does every single thing better.
Every single thing better.
But it doesn't, which I used to say for a while until we did that replay of it, where I'm like, the remake makes the original non-essential. Where going back, it's like, no, playing the original really shows that this game had it from the start.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the remake is better in every facet, that the original stands on its own as this amazing example of what can be done with barely any hardware that's able to do anything, and a small team to be able to create one of the biggest iconic titles ever.
And to think that structurally, the games are pretty much the exact same, minus a give or take a few sections, but they're basically the same. So a game on the PS1 to a game on the GameCube ending up being the same. Like, you can't really escape the formula if you already got it. So they pretty much got it.
I think what the remake really does the best is keeping the atmosphere really what they wanted it to be in the original.
Yeah.
Where the original, it does what it can do with what it got, you know?
And it probably the translation probably made things a little goofier than they were anticipating. Like, maybe if you knew Japanese and you played the original, it'd be less goofy. It's probably still goofy, but
I'm sure it's still a little corny, but
yeah.
The like, if you look at the environments in Resident Evil 1, how bright they are and things because of how the limitations were that they're all pre-rendered backgrounds, which they are in the GameCube version as well for the most part. The remake is much more able to use darkness to keep its environments the way they're going for atmospherically, compared to the original where everything's so bright and jumping out at you. But back then there was nothing like it as far as horror that could even compare.
And they were probably worried about how stuff would visually look on television too, because there's not a whole lot of super dark games on the PS1, at least.
Silent Hill 1.
That was what I was going to say. And if I'm not mistaken, Silent Hill 1 was made to be like Konami's
their answer to Resident Evil.
Right.
The additions to Resident Evil 1 from the original, like Lisa Trevor
and remake.
Yeah. I consider them so synonymous with each other, even though one is so much better. You could talk about them interchangeably.
Yes.
But the changes that they made, like the addition of Lisa Trevor's character, adding like lore of how the mansion was built with the Trevor family.
That's similar to RE4 Remake.
Yes, and RE4 Remake does such a good job of expanding on so much.
Just like little tidbits of lore where you didn't know there were gaps. But it's like, oh, you know what? That does...
Yeah, like you can tell, and I said this when I was playing Resident Evil 4 too, how you can tell the game was made by people who got it, that are like, this is why this game is so good, and we love it too, as much as the fans do, and giving it the attention and detail that it deserves in our minds. But remake, as far as like the other Resident Evil games that we're going to talk about today, obviously the best way to play those is on the remastered version, where they added widescreen support and they added all this cool stuff.
Yep.
But with these games, Resident Evil 2 and 3 and Code Veronica and all those, you got to play them on the GameCube. The controller is I think the GameCube controller is the best way to play Resident Evil games, including the original, like the remake. Just the way the analog sticks and buttons are laid out just feels like it's built for Resident Evil.
Resident Evil Remake, the first one, 2002, is a strong contender for greatest game of all time.
Absolutely.
I really, when you start getting to the point where you're looking at it under a microscope, like, it's gotta be, right? So there are certain games that I have rated 5 out of 5, or even movies, where it's like, you know, Alien, I think, is a 5 out of 5 movie, but there is a little goofy shot of when the alien does this, or this ADR looks a little funky, or this looks a little weird. With Remake, I really, truly cannot think of anything in that game where it's like, I would have removed that, or I would have changed this, or I would have whatever.
Yeah.
And my brain immediately just went to the point of, well, maybe it could use some more content, but that's not even true, because after you beat the game, there's like 2 other modes you can do in it.
There's the zombie, or like I think it's called the one zombie mode.
Yeah.
Where there's the grenade ridden zombie that I think it's Brad
Mhm.
or some. It's a character from the Stars.
He's
game
got like
that,
a grenade vest on.
yeah, that if he takes any damage, he blows up.
Yeah, so
and
he's-
destroys the mansion instantly.
Right, he's wandering the halls randomly, or maybe he might be in fixed points.
Because when I was I re-platinumed it recently, one thing I thought was kind of lame was he is in like 3 hallways, and he's going to be in those hallways at certain points.
Yeah.
So like when you've gotten to the point with Resident Evil where you know where everything is and you're doing the same route every time and trying to just do it faster, you know this time he's going to be in this hallway.
Yeah, right.
Where it would have been cooler, which this is how they could have made it a 5.5 out of 5, is truly randomize where he
Right.
is.
I mean, and at that point, you're like, well, they should have put in a randomizer mod where I go through
Yeah.
a door and it takes me to a random door in the mansion, or they should have done this.
that
Like,
would have been sick.
yeah, which does sound pretty fun.
Although it would have been horrible at
Crazy.
the same time.
But yeah, at that point, you shouldn't be faulting game for something it doesn't do. You should be grading it based on what it does do. And
One of my favorite difficulties ever they added is invisible enemy mode, which is so awesome that it's like, you think you know everything about this game?
Yeah.
Okay, every enemy's invisible.
and the inclusion of that shows that they got it.
Mm-hmm.
That they know that the audience playing that are the guys that are memorizing their routes and
Mhm.
what you do when you play it for the 50th time. That's why that's included. It's not like it's there for newcomers. Like that's there because they know the audience that they're catering to.
And when you beat that, you get a message from Shinji Mikami. Like that's how you get the note with Chris and Jill on it
yeah.
that says like, thank you for playing my game.
Yes.
So sick.
Yeah.
Like they know they are catering to us, the real gamers.
Right.
And the first time I played, the first Resident Evil game I ever played was Remake, which is really cool that it's not like most people. It's like, 4 or 5 or something like that, like
Yep.
the best sellers. Where Remake did not sell well, which is absolutely criminal. But because it was on the GameCube, where most people aren't going to play that.
I think it was in that exclusivity deal, maybe.
Yeah, it was with Capcom 5 or whatever.
The Capcom 5, which was like Beautiful Joe and Killer 7 and prototype number 3 or serial number 3 or something like that.
I know what you're talking about.
That's the only one that everybody's forgotten about. The other ones are mostly decently
Resident Evil
popular.
4, the
Yes.
game that famously stayed on one console.
Right, for like a year or
Mhm.
less than a year.
Yeah, Resident Evil. Yeah, I think it was a year that it went on the PS2. It was definitely 2006
Yeah.
because RE4 was 05. But I'm playing it for the first time
Yep.
at my childhood neighbor's house. And he has a little tube TV like this big, and it's sitting on his dresser like up here.
I
Like,
love stories like this.
it's like so not optimal, let's just say, for gaming. And he's got one of those rocking gaming chairs that are just the worst ever, that crush your fingers and they the audio never works or anything like that. It's peak 2004 gaming or whatever. I wish I knew what year it was that we were playing it, but it definitely wasn't new when we were playing it. And he also, like childhood me at Graham's house, didn't own a memory card for some reason,
Yeah.
or his memory card was full, so we could never save. So every time we played Resident Evil, which we were always absolutely horrified to play this game, like one person would be playing, the other person would be in the closet, like literally absolutely terrified. That we were playing it as if it were a roguelite almost,
yeah.
where it's like you got one chance and then you start over if you die.
That's
But
so
I don't
great.
think we ever even figured out to use the arrowhead. I think we there was just no progress ever. It was an unlimited content game, honestly, because we never even got 5% through it.
That was back when, well, at least for our age, people that are like teenagers when this game came out probably weren't as stupid as we were, but
No.
it's when you're at that age and you're just exploring games as a medium where like you don't understand, but you don't think to look at the manual or do whatever, where you're just kind of like going in it. That's when it's like the most magical, where like the game could do anything and I don't understand what it is or whatever. And you're just kind of running through it like an idiot.
The first games
love
for me
that.
like that were like BioShock. Games that were like, I got it, and it was like super deep and interesting, where when I was too young for Resident Evil. Not like graphic wise or anything like that, but like I couldn't grasp the concept of what I was supposed to do.
This is like, this might be a false memory of mine. I'm not sure, but Mitchell has described it, so it must be real, which is with Resident Evil 1 on the PlayStation 1. And PlayStation 1 was, we were mostly Nintendo kids, but we had PS1 and eventually PS2. So well-versed in the library. So I must have been like 5 years old. Yeah. When Resident Evil 1 found its way into a PlayStation 1, I guess my mom got it. I don't know why she would though, for us. But I feel like I remember watching the intro scene of them running through the field or whatever, and for some reason, like, my brain was thinking they were being chased by like velociraptors or something, because we like Jurassic Park at the time. So I feel like this might be a real memory. Anyway, Mitch gets too scared, which is similar to which is similar to another story that I'll tell in the next episode. Gets too scared and shuts the game off. And then we never saw it again. Didn't know what we were doing. Anyway, so I did see it and did not pick up the Resident Evil series until RE4.
Oh, much later. Yeah.
Much later. So missed out on basically the entire PS1 Resident Evil library.
You missed out on some bangers, bro. Because you finally got to play Resident Evil 2.
Yeah.
What did you think?
Resident Evil 2.
So, I never played Resident Evil 2. The first time I played it was the remake.
Mm-hmm.
So to set this up, let me explain my experience with the remake.
Yeah.
Tons of accolades. Like, everybody is singing praises
Game
for
of the
this
year.
game. Yes. Everybody's like, they did it. They got it. To which I, now having played the PS1 version, I would agree they remade that game fantastically. They really did. Because my issues with that game are the exact same as the PS1 version. Which is, I feel like RE2 is pretty antithetical to the first game. That might be evidence that maybe Shinji Mikami didn't want the first game to be what it was, perhaps. Maybe he wanted it to be more like Resident Evil 2, which is very segmented. You said a lot of people really like the police station. I was not impressed with that at all, because I love the mansion. I love the way it's structured. I love how you get the keys. And a perfect example to encapsulate why I do not really care for that game is there are some puzzles that you have to revisit several times, like the statue that you put 3 things in or whatever, stuff like that. In the PS1 version, you go to the top of like the clock tower or something and put a gear in or whatever. And in my brain, I was like, oh, this is actually kind of cool. I was just in the basement or the parking garage or whatever, or sewer, something like that. And they just set it up where I ran all the way up there to put in this key item, and now I got to run all the way back. And I was kind of looking forward to that. And then Leon's like, hey, there's a air vent, or there's a shaft right here. Basically a giant slide that goes all the way back to where you just ran from. So that was just a perfect way to sum up, where it's just like, why not challenge me to do that? And the game is not, it's not super challenging, but it's not a baby game either.
No.
But just like, why do that? Did not like that. Feel like the game is way too short.
Did you play both characters?
Yeah, that's a stupid response. Both characters do the same thing basically. So game is
differences,
and it's shorter than the original.
Oh, for sure,
by a lot. So
it's like 5.5 hours long.
But this is the sequel marks when the game started to get more cinematic, because there's like cut scenes and there's a lot of dialogue like between characters that move the narrative and stuff like that. Just not a fan. Really,
I'll say something crazy that's almost for the entire franchise. Almost, I don't think the story really matters in Resident Evil very much.
You mean the overarching story?
Like it's a cool background, but like no one's playing Resident Evil to be like, what's going to happen to Barry next? You
in the next game, you mean?
Right.
What's going to happen to Barry in the sequel?
Like, yeah, no one's playing like, I can't wait to see what they think of next for the storyline.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm more, and maybe some people are like me, where I'm like, I love the gameplay of these games that are like, I almost look at the gameplay as if it's like a math equation, where it's like, I'm going into a room and there's one zombie in the room, and I have 5 bullets in my handgun, and my health is at medium, and I have a green herb. It's like, is it better for me to use my 5 bullets to guarantee that I don't take damage if I hit all 5 of those shots, and then I won't have to use my green herb? Or should I try to get around him, save my ammo, and I might not take damage, or I would have to use it, and now I don't have any healing items for the next room?
Yep.
That's why I play Resident Evil, where the story isn't that big of a deal. But with that, I think that archetype works a lot better in the first game, where there's a lot less ammo and enemy encounters are a lot more important. Like, there's one zombie in the room, like that could be the end of me. Where Resident Evil 2, you're running into so many zombies, and the gameplay or the combat is a lot more of the focus rather than risk reward management. And that's what I love about Resident Evil as a whole. So I would definitely say RE1 is better than RE2. And
which is a hot take, by the way. Which is smoking hot take.
Which is crazy. And I might even say I might like the remake more than I like the original Resident Evil 2, which is also like, it took me a long time to admit that to myself. Once I took the glasses off, I was like, you know what? I think they did a better job. Mainly because if you play Resident Evil 2, especially on hard, which is the way you should be playing Resident Evil games, because otherwise I don't think you're really getting the full experience. Sure. Each zombie in Resident Evil 2 is like, this could kill me.
Yeah,
question.
Every single one is a roadblock.
Because it's like every zombie game up to, like if you're playing Left 4 Dead, is like one zombie's nothing. One headshot is nothing. Where Resident Evil 2 Remake especially is like, one zombie on hard could be 10 shots.
It was very kind of exciting when they first showed it off to be like, you're popping this dude in the head like 3-4 times and he still comes back up and he's still walking towards you. So he's still an obstacle. And I like that they use enemies just not as things to dispense ammo on, but actual roadblocks where it's like, oh, a good example is in the beginning of Resident Evil 2 when you're exploring, there's like a hallway that has like vending machines in it. You don't see them because they're off screen in the original PS1, but you hear the footsteps and then like it's 5 or 6 of them. It's cool that it's like, oh, should I even? Nope, I'm just going to turn around and run away.
Like in a game that can do that where Resident Evil 4, in the village, you fight 200 enemies before the bell rings. Yeah. But in Resident Evil 2, you see one licker in a hallway and you're like, I'm not going that way.
Yep.
That is impossible going that direction. And I've never had a game, actually there's one other game like this for me, and it's also a Resident Evil game, which is Village, where like I have so many positives to say, especially about Remake, but I never find myself thinking about those games, where I think about RE7 every day at least 3 times. Where 2, it's like I will go years without playing it, and I start to get a negative feel for it. And then I play it again, and I'm like, why do I not like this game? And then as time goes on, I start like picking it apart again in my brain. Like they could have done more with the alligator from the first game, which is so like out of nowhere ridiculous.
Wait, from the first game?
In Resident Evil 2.
Oh,
the original
in the
Resident
original
Evil 2. That he comes down the hallway and you gotta wait for him to grab the gas tank and then he blows up.
Yeah.
Where in the remake, it's like so over the top insane that you're getting down this slide like RE6 style.
Yes.
But there's so much that I love about RE2, but it starts to like lose over time the things that I like about it, and I start to notice like, well, the game is really, really short, and there's not any real side content other than the 4th survivor, which you beat once and you move on. It's not that like exciting once you beat it.
Do you unlock that by playing both of them?
I think when you get the true ending, which is, if you play the original game, the true ending is Claire B, Leon A, because it depends on who you play first. The remake doesn't really matter who you do first. It's basically the same game anyway, and then you have a true final boss. Resident Evil 2 is such an odd piece for me, even though Resident Evil 2 Remake should be the perfect game for me. And I still always find myself, when I do rarely think about it, like Village, I always focus on the negative, and I almost can't explain why.
I think it's because you want it to be so much more than it is. Like I do.
Yeah.
Like I love the first, so me having never played the second, when I played the second, it was just like, oh, like I love so much about this, and I love what it, I don't know, love what it could be. You're romanticizing with the idea of a perfect version, which I think a perfect version of Resident Evil 2, which most people say perfect version already exists. It's called Resident Evil 2. But I feel like a perfect version is, there is no split campaign kind of thing. And it's just more fleshed out with the police station. Like, because that is the main appeal of Resident Evil games. I mean, I guess nowadays not anymore, but having, here is, you're in a giant puzzle box and you got to break your way out and whatever.
Yeah. Which 7 kind of comes back to, but it's in Village, sort of, where it's like a couple puzzle boxes, like 7 especially, got the main house and the old house, then it's kind of just a shooter from that point forward. But 2, I think if they would have fleshed out I think you spend enough time in RPD, honestly, where the mansion is it almost makes sense that it's so over the top insane, but like eventually in the police station, like if it would have just kept going with, and there's more departments and more, that it'd be like, this is just ridiculous.
I suppose. I think what it is that when you get to, what is it? You like go to the sewers next? Is that the next place?
After the PD is the sewers.
It just feels very disconnected. It feels like you're on part 2 of the game, and then you wrap it up in part 3 where you inevitably go to the lab thingy. It just feels very disjointed. And the pacing of the game, I think, is very strange because both times it took me by surprise that the game was ending, that I was on the final boss. I was like, oh, this is ramping up to be, oh no, that's it. Oh, okay.
Oh, we're at Act 2 now.
Yeah.
Oh,
right.
We're at Campaign 2 now. I guess, which is mostly the same.
Both times I fell for it. Both times I did not shoot a single shot from my Magnum. Both campaigns.
Yeah.
Both times I played the remake and the original.
It'd be kind of nice, and right now I'm playing Half-Life 2, which has nothing to do with anything. But I wish they would give you more ammo for the fun guns like that. Would entice, like, give you enough that you're full more often, and then you find some ammo that you can't pick up because you're full, which would incentivize you to use it. Where, like, in Half-Life 2, the Magnum's like my favorite gun in the game, but you never get Magnum ammo.
Yeah.
So I'm never going to use it because I got to fight Gordon Freeman or something at the end.
You are Gordon Freeman.
Am I?
In Half-Life 2?
Yeah, I know. Or the G-Man or something. We're going to fight him.
Guy, yeah. Nope, you don't.
But which would also hurt the survival horror aspect of it because the whole point is that you're supposed to be low on ammo.
That is a tough thing. I think most games, how they approach when you get a new item or weapon like that is they put you in a room or a box where you just got the Magnum. Here's how you use it. Like in Doom or...
Yeah. Half-Life 2 does that very, very well.
Yeah. So
every time you get a gun, it's like, here's the perfect scenario that this weapon would be used for.
Yeah.
And here's an unlimited ammo source for it.
Like getting the Magnum in Resident Evil or Resident Evil 2 would be like you're in a room full of hunters or whatever, and you just go pop, 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 and take them all down. And they give you 10 shots when you...
Right. At the exit of the room to be like, all right, now you're good, but that's it. No more fun.
Yeah. Right.
But it's like that, like I said, that would kind of hurt the experience having the super weapon unless you're playing on easy. I think one of the things with Resident Evil 1 compared to 2 is the limitations of what Resident Evil 1 had to work with, of probably a limited budget, probably a small team of developers, that when that game sold 1 billion copies, they got so much more in the resource department to make Resident Evil 2, when a lot of what made Resident Evil 1 so amazing were the limitations that they had to work around. Of like, with our budget, we can only have 3 enemies on screen or whatever. So we have to make those encounters as important as possible so that it feels the way it's supposed to. Where when Resident Evil 2 came out and they spent $1 billion making that game, they could have, like at the beginning when there's like 7 zombies in the street all swarming you instantaneously. It's the limitations of the first game make it what it is.
Yeah. Where they're just like a giant obstacle where it's like, oh God, do I go this way? If you were able to kill all of them, then, that would be...
It's not scary anymore.
Right. Not scary.
Which, the beginning of Resident Evil 2 on PS1, I love it. Because that is the most, like, figure it out.
You're in danger.
Start, like, here's Leon. There are 5 zombies in front of you. There are no tutorials. I love that.
Yes, that is like Super Mario Brothers 1. They probably took it from this. Super Mario Brothers 1. You press start. There is a Goomba on the right side of the screen that is walking towards you. If you do nothing, you die. Like if you are AFK when you hit the start button. So it is like you need to figure this one thing out, which Mario is saying. You need to figure out how to jump and jump on or over this enemy, or you are not allowed to,
running out.
or you are not allowed to play the game. You have 4 seconds. And Resident Evil 2 is the same way, where it's like you have to figure out what to do now. Otherwise, if you can't do this right here, you're not allowed to play the game.
And it's one of like the craziest like enemy to Leon ratios in the game at that point, where like I don't think there's more enemies on screen than that moment.
Probably
where
not.
It's like, here's Leon, 4 zombies, there's fire around you, I believe, that can also hurt you. You have like 10 shots for your gun, so you can't kill all of them. Figure it out and figure out how to get to the bus that leads you to...
Yeah. And that also
RPD.
teaches you that your bullets ammo and guns they don't exist for the same reason in Resident Evil as they do in Call of Duty. Call of Duty is just like shoot, bang, bang. I like to kill. Killing is fun. This is like your gun is your tool in Resident Evil, and your ammo is, your ticker for how many times you get to use that tool.
Mm-hmm.
And enemies are your obstacles.
Yeah,
Which I
you can
think is
almost
awesome.
look at it as just like everything is just a puzzle, and that is your equipment you have to solve it, instead of Gears of War, Chainsaw Man, kill
Right.
everything in sight.
Right.
Like Resident Evil, that's what I love about Resident Evil, is that just constant puzzle solving. It's not just find the medallions for the statue.
Yeah.
It's figure out each combat encounter as if it is its own puzzle.
Yeah, that's when like you go to a new room and then you have to pause the screen and then you look at your inventory like this. Do I do that? Do I do that? Yeah, I love that too.
Yeah, I have the shotgun with 2 shots. Could I get a headshot on that?
Yeah, and then you look at your map and you're like, well, can I make it to the item box? And if I do that, the whole routing and item management is just the best. I'm curious how modern kiddo gamers today would react to that sort of thing, because the modern games aren't really as much like that.
No, you could only argue 7, maybe.
Yes,
maybe
a little bit.
Well, RE2 as well.
Yes.
RE3 and 4 are not, but like 2 is a true survival horror game, just modern.
Yes. So I mean, well, I guess RE2 remake sold well, so I'd be very interested. And this topic could go in any part of the series, but I'd be interested to see if they were to bring back the classic style. At least it doesn't have to be fixed camera, but the classic style, like Resident Evil 2 remake, where like you're really figuring out your route and that sort of thing, and have to item manage and look at your map and do this and that. If they were to make Resident Evil 9 or 10 like that, because that's the style that I prefer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anyone who really prefers like the RE6 style.
No.
But I think Village is the closest. I don't think we're going to get another game like 7.
Village is the closest.
Village is the closest we're going to get, I think, to like classic horror, like the castle section and things like that.
Oh, well,
I don't think we're ever going to get RE7 again. I think that was a one and done. Even though it sold amazing and it reviewed well, I think Capcom like played their hand and it worked, and I think they're going to be scared to do it again, of like, okay, we're going to go to the classic gamers again who really want this like old crusty style of gameplay, when there's the whole crowd of people over here who want to shoot little Timmy and go wild, like the end of Village where you're killing a million things. Like, and I want them to do that. I want them to go the RE7 style again. I would love for them to do a fixed camera angle game again, even though I don't think they would do Resident Evil 9 like that. I think that's too big of a risk for them, where people play and be like, what is this? Why is the camera not following me?
Why doesn't
when
the
I
right
walk?
stick do anything?
But if they did like a Revelations 3 kind of game that was like not super high budget, like 8 or 9 will be.
I don't want Revelations 3.
But like, call it Revelations 3, but it's a fixed camera classic survival horror game. Imagine there's got to be someone on Earth who played Resident Evil on the GameCube, and then they hadn't played it anywhere else, and then Resident Evil 2 came out on the GameCube.
Oh,
like, oh dude, it's the new
It's the
one.
next
And it's
one.
like 10 years old at that point,
right.
and you're like, what?
Yeah. I guess next naturally to talk about is Resident Evil 3.
Resident Evil.
I guess my timeline with Resident Evil is a little strange too, because I really started with 4 and I guess played 5 when it came out and skipped 6. And
As you should have.
Yeah, skipped 6. People were saying it was bad. What? Skipped 6 and played, I guess 7 would have been the next one that I would have played.
And then there's a bunch of spin-offs. But
I didn't play the classics. Did I play any? Oh, well, yeah, I played a couple spin-offs. Anyway, I played 2 and 3 remakes before I played the PS1 version. So you probably think I'm going to say that I think the remake is better. But I don't think so, actually.
You don't think it is?
No. It is more fun, though, but in like a stupid game kind of way. Is what I'll say.
It's a less interesting game, but it's more enjoyable. Definitely more approachable than the actual RE3 Nemesis.
I played Resident Evil 3 Remake first, and I liked it, and everybody hates it.
Yes.
Now having played the original just recently, I get it, but some of it is completely unjustified. A term that I've heard when people talk about why they hate Resident Evil 3 Remake is I've heard the term grave digger a lot.
It
And
was so sick.
dude,
It's a giant worm.
it's fucking
Gears of War 2 style.
It's so bad.
What?
That fight is so stupid. And the map for the fight is just a curved hallway like this.
Yeah.
So you just run and
It's scary.
no, it's not.
It's so fun.
It's so
I remember
not.
that.
So the fact that people use that as like a thing where they're like, dude, it doesn't even have Gravedigger. Who fucking cares?
I think
about
there's
Gravedigger?
more. I think Gravedigger's at the bottom of the list of things that are missing from
Sure.
RE3.
Sure.
Because there's the clock tower.
Yes.
That whole section.
I thought that section was good. It's pretty iconic, I guess. I don't know because I just played it recently, but it
Mhm.
feels like a big staple section, I think.
There's so much cool. The spiders in there. There's so much. It's like it's on fire and stuff like that. There's the piano in there. I think Carlos is in there. There's like so much in the clock tower. It's just nope.
It's smaller than you remember it is.
I know
I'll
it's
say.
not like a
It's not like a Spencer mansion,
kind
but
of
it
thing,
kind
but
of
it's like a fun area.
yeah, and it visually looks like the mansion, and there is some running around. I don't know how people feel about the puzzles in this game, but they're not super great. There were a
Most
couple.
people seem to think they're a little hard for Resident Evil.
I don't know that I'd say hard. What I'll say is a lot of them are like very brute force kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that didn't work, do this one. Oh, that didn't work, do that one. Okay, and now, okay, so I do it in this order then because I have to go dot, dot, dot. It's not like, I'll give you a great example. In the clock tower, you go to a room with 3 paintings. One is the painting of the past, present, and future. And then off to the side are 3 gems. One of them is a crystal ball, the other one's an obsidian ball, and the other one is a amber ball. I was like, let's think. Let me use my brain.
They don't want you using that.
Right. Amber. Let's see. Amber is from the past, maybe. Like it's
Like resin.
right. So I put that in the past section. And then it turns like a clock or whatever. I didn't really I knew that I was supposed to line it up with midnight, but I didn't really, I wasn't thinking about that. Then I thought a crystal ball. Crystal ball lets you see into the future. I'll
Mhm.
put it there. And then obsidian, I just put it whatever. And then it worked. I'm like, dude, awesome. And I died from Nemesis because there was a Nemesis jump
Of
scare.
course.
And then I went back and the puzzle changed. That was no longer the solution. I'm like, whoa, huh? And I didn't really look anything up, but I did look this up because I'm like, what is going on? And it'll just randomly be the solution will be randomly different. And there's no logic to it other than trial and error, which is when I put the obsidian ball in the past, it adds 4 hours to the clock. But when I put the obsidian ball in the future, it'll subtract 2 hours. Or if I put it in the present, it'll add 1 hour. It just doesn't, it's all just brute force kind of figure it out kind of thing. It's not like use your noodle kind of puzzle.
Resident Evil isn't super known for that. It's more for like, especially in RE4, stuff like that, like manipulating shapes and things. There's not a lot of like logic puzzles in Resident Evil, where 3 definitely has some weirdo randomness to it.
Yeah.
Especially like the water puzzle.
That
I hated that one. That's like the famous bad Resident Evil puzzle, but of course Ryan loves it.
I didn't really have a problem with that because I'm a genius and I'm smart.
Well, you brute forced it, I would assume.
No, actually.
I would assume.
No, actually not.
Classic.
That's just because like it's I don't want to explain how the puzzle works, but when you line it up, you can see how this thing would work here, and you line it up there, and like, that doesn't work. Maybe if I move this way, oh, it works, and that was it.
Yeah, it's kind of like RE2 remake as a puzzle. When you're in the lab and there's like the spinning puzzle down there, that one's really annoying. Where it's like, oh, if I move this liquid over here, and then I had to move it over here.
Yeah, that's just an example of like just brute force.
Yeah.
Just, it didn't work that way. Okay, let's try it this way.
Where like Silent Hill has a lot more like you're figuring out story-based things, like the hangman puzzle in Silent Hill 2 that's like which man hanging is the innocent one, and you have to like read their reports and stuff like that to figure out who's innocent and who's not.
Anyway, back to Resident Evil 3.
Anyway.
Super cool, super tight.
Mm-hmm.
There is some goofiness, and I think this is about at the point where the series starts to feel more action oriented, like action game, silly silly was always there, but just kind of like over the top with Nemesis being like a guy and he's the villain and he's the final boss.
And he never stops.
Right. With the cutscenes too. It's trying to be a more cinematic, over the top kind of thing, which it does pretty well. And in the remake too, they really kind of butchered the bad guys, like the the stars, or not the stars, the umbrella.
Russian, umbrella operatives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just really weird. Like, I liked the dynamic kind of that was here in the original, but very strange.
In the remake, it's very much like he is the bad guy.
Bad guy.
When is he actually going to be the bad guy? Where in the original, it's like, okay, you're kind of just working together, trying to get out of the city. And then he turns out to be the bad guy.
90s kind of like Russian guy is the bad guy kind of thing. What? I like money, but I'm here to save you, Jill. I promise. And it's like, okay.
I save everyone.
Yeah, it's just so goofy. So I like the map layout in the remake too. And you get to go on rooftops.
In Resident Evil 3 in general, you actually feel like you're exploring Raccoon City, where RE2, it's like you're in the police station, then you're in the sewer, then you're in the lab.
Yeah.
You kind of
You're
have
like
some
adjacent.
interactions
You're
with
adjacent.
the city.
Yeah, you're adjacent
like,
to the city.
I think RE3 Nemesis does a way better job of feeling like you're in the downfall of the city, where RE3 feels like you're just there after everything happened, which you kind of are with the timeline of RE2 and 3, especially with canon with the original Resident Evil. There's no way, I think, for everybody to escape the mansion, because when you play as Jill, you don't even see Rebecca Chambers. Or when you play as Chris, there's someone else. Maybe is he Barry?
Maybe Barry was just outside hiding in a bush the whole time.
He never came in the whole time.
But in the very end of Resident Evil 3, I was a little surprised that you're in the helicopter, of course, and riding into the sunset, and
lo and behold,
Jill looks at the pilot and says, "Oh, is it really you?" And the pilot says,
I have this.
Yeah, well, he doesn't say anything really. I'm like, was that supposed to be Barry?
Oh, yeah.
And then I look it up and it's supposed to be Barry, but you wouldn't tell because he's wearing a freaking thing and a thing. It doesn't look like Barry.
And why wouldn't they do that in the remake?
Yes.
Like,
but I mean,
why not?
All I'm saying is, first of all, she should have at least said, "Oh, Barry, it's you. I love you." Remember?
She doesn't say that?
The word Barry is not spoken in that game.
Maybe it was Brad. Maybe he got out alive.
Well, I looked it up and the people think it's Barry.
Well,
but why not? I don't know.
She should have said that in the original, but why in the remake they don't even play that game at all?
Yeah, that is bizarre.
Because Carlos flies the helicopter away in the remake,
Yeah,
right?
Jill, come with me, Jill. I will say though, I don't know what the people think, but the hospital section in remake is way better than in the original, because there's like a whole chunk where you play as Carlos, and I remember the keycard system being fun and running around, and hunters kind of running around in there.
Yeah.
That was a fun section in the remake.
Having that almost like unlocking, like what Resident Evil should be, like unlocking rooms and then going forward and getting a new key to go back and open something else, and like jumping off the like top floor to get the Magnum down there and run around. Like there's a lot of fun stuff in the remake.
That I think is super well done. And they took some liberties, but I think they did it in a proper way.
One thing I don't understand is why you play as Carlos in the police station in the remake.
Yeah.
It's so weird. Like, because the police station's a pretty decent chunk in RE3, Nemesis. But in the remake, it's like quick, on rail, straight through as Carlos. And you have I forget your partner's name at that point. But it's just so like...
Mikhail?
Yeah, something like that. And then you kill Brad there too, which is really cool.
Oh, Brad is a zombie?
Yeah. And then he says sorry right before he bites Marvin.
Oh, so they made it so that Brad is the one that bites Marvin.
Yeah, so there's some cool lore stuff they do there. But RE3, one of my biggest problems with RE3 remake
doesn't
is
have Gravedigger.
There's no Gravedigger, there's no Clock Tower, and what they do to Nemesis.
Yeah.
Because in the original, he could show up anytime, anywhere, and just ruin everything. Where in the remake, it's so painfully scripted.
Technically, it's still scripted in the original.
It doesn't feel like it.
He show up so frequently, probably at the perfect time play wise, like where you're like, I feel like, and then he shows up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't seen. Oh.
I can't believe we haven't mentioned this yet, but in the remake, I think because it's easier to develop this way, they didn't include the live selection choices where it's like, oh, Nemesis is coming. Do I shoot him or do I jump into this dumpster and hide or something like that? Like they don't have anything like that.
I feel like the game back then they did that because there was only one campaign, where in RE1 and 2 you could play as Jill or Chris or Leon or Claire. But also this game, or Nemesis, includes the Mercenaries mode for the first time in the series. It's a lot different from like RE4 Mercenaries, but it's still like a trial based kind of thing. I only played it a little bit. but I don't even count with the remake that it came with Resident Evil Resistance. Like, that is
Nobody
so totally not interesting. But as a side note, that's who's developing Silent Hill F. So get excited for that.
The Resistance people?
The Resident Evil Resistance team is making Silent Hill F. So
Yeah.
just keep that in mind when that comes out. So got to temper your expectations with that. But as far as RE3 goes, with the remake, it's so short and there's so little content and there's not a lot of replay value other than the shop. Beat the game and get raccoon points and buy unlimited ammo stuff.
I like that.
But that's why I feel like remake introduced so many difficulties, because it's like all we can do to incentivize replayability beyond that is add like 4 more difficulties after you beat the game, because it's easy, normal, hardcore, nightmare, and inferno, I think. And inferno is absolutely ridiculously stupid.
You die and it's over kind of thing?
No, but like you take so much damage. And there are people in a Facebook group that I'm in that have been stuck on the final boss of Inferno for like years. Because if Nemesis like touches you where he's in that like super Squidman form, you die immediately.
So he does, as far as butchering Nemesis, he does turn into Super Squidman in the original.
Way later.
Well, that's the final boss.
Yeah.
Is when he's Super Squidman. But, and also his mutations are more subtle rather than, and I don't know which is better, to be honest, but like when you're fighting in Remake outside of the clock tower, he's like in dog form.
Yeah.
And he's climbing around, which I like that fight. But as far as how to, like, if they ruined Nemesis, I don't know. I think part of the canon in the original is when you fight him a certain time, I think it's in like the lab, or no, it's when you're in the park and then you go underground and then there's like the secret testing facility, whatever. There's like a garbage compactor trash chute thing, and in that pile there's like corpses from other tests, including a tyrant. So you hit the button, jump through the door, and then Nemesis goes down along with the tyrant, and their goos get mixed, and that's why he turns into Squiddy guy at the very end.
I felt like the first time that he turns into Squidman in the remake, which is right after the subway sequence. So like once that gets blown up, he jumps in the water because he's on fire. And I remember the first time I played it being like, we're already done with that form of him. Like I didn't know how short the game was when I played it. When RE3 remake came out, we were in, as a society, we were in the height of COVID. We were at the peak, basically, where shutdown was in action. I kept worrying because I got the collector's edition, as I do for this game, from GameStop, which it might have been exclusive to them. And I'm like, oh my God, what if I don't get this game because the world is collapsing? I'm not going to get Resident Evil 3.
I want my game.
Yeah, the world can end the day after Resident Evil 3 comes out because I want to play that first. Because it's going to be the best game ever because I like RE3 more. They're going to do it, right? I kept getting nervous. And then all of a sudden, GameStop calls me. And I'm like, oh, it's dead. It's over. And they're like, we got all our copies in. And it was like 4 days before the game came out. And they're like, we're worried we're going to get shut down. Do you just want to come get it? I'm like, yeah.
Wait, get it early?
Yeah.
What?
So I got RE3 remake 4 days before it actually, that's the only time I've gotten a game like before it came out.
Before street date.
I platinumed RE3 remake before it came out. So once you fight him as dog form, I felt like I can't believe I'm already done fighting him in the cool rocket launcher chase you form. Because then every time after that, it's a boss fight. It's not organically running into him anymore, which Resident Evil 3 never lets you organically run into him. When you run into him in the original, it's so much more like any time he could show up and destroy me, where the remake is like you meet him. I forget the first encounter. It's when he busts through the wall or something like that. Other than the scripted sequence in the apartment. Yeah.
Oh,
because like the first time you really like fight him.
I think it's just on the streets of Raccoon City before you even get to the police station.
Okay.
Like when you're just kind of running around. Because there's...
You don't get to the police station for a long time in the remake.
Right, because there's a lot to do. Yeah, there's a lot to do before you get to the police station. So it's kind of funny how it kind of tricks you into thinking that it's going to be a long game because it's like, dang, in the original I would have been at the police station already, but I'm not even there yet. But then
Tries to
it's because,
gaslight
well,
you
we
to
did.
make it feel like it's
Yeah, it's
long.
because we cut a big chunk out of the game.
If they would have replaced it with something different, great.
Well, you could say in remake, in Resident Evil 3 remake, when you're in like, there's like a sewer section, which is not super large in the original.
Mhm.
In the remake though, there's like these big giant,
The goop men.
yeah, goopy guys. And those are not in the original at all.
There are enemies that were in the remake or in the original that are missing too. Like there's a hunter variant
Yeah.
that I think is missing as
Yeah,
well. Like
it kind of looks like a hunter mixed with a licker or something because it's very fleshy looking, not reptilian.
I think they're like alpha hunters or something like that.
okay.
Like there's I feel like everything the remake does that's new, it cuts a whole huge thing.
And it's
like,
odd.
oh, there's a new enemy, but there's no gravedigger.
Right. So clearly Capcom had an objective, right? Because there's no reason not to include all the things that we pointed out that are missing. We want it to be this long. We want it to come out on this date. You know, and it has to happen. So make it happen. Because they didn't take very many liberties to make it new and fun and exciting.
They had like an outside team make Resident Evil 3 remake. The team that remade RE2 and RE4 is not the team that remade RE3. Like there was also when the big Capcom leak happened, like 4 or 5 years ago, there was a design document or like a pitch document for RE3 remake, and it was always planned to be like 5 hours long.
Yeah. So see, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But it's so, now that I have the perspective, it's like those are the 3 landmark titles, the landmark PS3 or PS1 Resident Evil games.
Mhm.
So it's strange that like this one received the treatment of like this one is okay to cut short. It's
I
very
feel
weird.
like maybe they were trying to like, we're just trying to get to RE4. Like that's the one that everybody wants.
Yeah.
We don't want to put a lot of time into RE3 because we want to put all our investments into 4. Everyone's going to bitch if we don't put out RE3 remakes. So let's just put it out and hopefully they like it. And IGN gave it a 9 out of 10.
3 remake?
Yes.
That's a little high.
That's like 3 points high.
That's a little
I would
high.
say I would give Resident Evil 3 remake on that scale like a 6.5, maybe a 7. Like, because it's a fun, solid, tight game, but it's way too tight. There's too much.
Sure.
Like if you
It
don't,
is like a micro game.
yeah, if you don't just pick it apart based on what's not there. Because if you just look at it objectively as what is this game that I have here, not just thinking that this is missing and this is missing, it's a fun game. I don't think it's a great, and people say this about 5 too, like it's not a great Resident Evil game, and 5's not a great game anyway, but like it's a fun, solid action horror game, where RE2 remake is a very good survival horror game.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with that too. Maybe it's fun that they're different, but I think most people just wanted the original game remade, which they didn't really get.
Yes, when they remade RE2, I was always like, and it was so quick to turn around, so I didn't even have a long time to like speculate on it. Like they already made like assets for the city,
Right.
The police station's
Right.
already there. They gotta just remake RE3, and then they announce, I'm like, I can't wait for this. Like this is what I wanted, and that comes out, and it's like such a step down. And especially playing it early, I had no knowledge that it was way short.
And you got a
like,
9 out of 10, so you were led to believe.
well, that review I don't think was even out yet when I played the game. So I went in with like no knowledge of anyone's playthrough. So I went in as unbiased as possible, as excited as possible, and I was let down almost immediately just by how
Yeah.
scripted it feels.
Very goofy, very cheesy, extremely cheesy. Don't like what they did with Jill, really.
I don't like her design.
Yeah,
in the
visually
remake.
and a line that I would often make fun of in the remake is in the very beginning when you're in this parking garage thing and you drive into Nemesis and drive off the edge of the building. She says, "I'll give you stars, bitch." And you were like, "Well, that's in the original," which it is. Sans
Minus
the word
one word.
bitch, which makes it awesome because you do that at the very end.
And you're just
when you kill him.
walking up to him. He's like,
Yes.
seizuring on the
Blah.
ground, and you have a magnum, and every step you're just shooting him.
Yes.
And that's how you feel as the player, just like, fuck.
What I think is cool is that you're given the choice: destroy the creature or run away. And there is no difference other than because the city is going to get nuked anyway. So
I wish they had like a percentage like the
Yeah, just so
Walking
you-
Dead style, like how many people picked each choice. It's
Right.
like 100% destroy the
right, just
creature.
because it's in, it gives you that freedom just to do something cool.
And that's what RE3 is, Nemesis. It's fun. And it's just there to like, every playthrough's different because of the enemy placements and the puzzle placements. It's just like there to be fun and constantly just run through it and have new experiences. RE3 Remake is a one and done unless you want to get the platinum because you have to play through it 5 times.
Right.
And there's no fun choices.
It'll be
no
the
fun
same every
decisions.
single time.
Yep.
Other than, getting, which the unlockables do help, but there are unlockables in the original as well, in the Mercenaries mode, which is basically you can select from any of the Umbrella team, which is Carlos, Mikhail, and Evil Russian Man. It's the same thing every time, which is a chunk of Raccoon City, uptown and downtown. And it's basically like, get to this location in this amount of time, and there's going to be a ton of crazy enemies along the way, and you only have these supplies. Good luck.
So it's like the hunk mission in RE2.
I
I'm
never did
forgetting
that
the
one.
name
But
of-
yes, it is like that. The only difference is, which I didn't realize because I finally did it, which was super hard, by the way. It's not easy. And my rank, it gave me an E. And I'm like, what?
What did I do
Yeah,
wrong?
what did I do wrong? And then I found online where some landmark locations in the city, if you go to them, there's actually survivors that you can rescue.
Wow.
So it is cool. And when you save the people, that increases your rank and they drop some more supplies and stuff for you. But it's really cool. Very, very difficult.
That is one thing with Nemesis is it's extremely hard.
Oh, yeah. Very
like
fucking hard.
weirdly hard.
Very fucking hard. And every encounter with Nemesis, I'm going to just say this to the world. If you have the option and you're playing on hard, just don't fight Nemesis any time ever. Even though it's cool, but it's almost never worth it because of how ridiculous it is. But that's the way it should be, I think.
Yeah, it should, because he is this unstoppable just wall that comes at you all the time.
And if you do manage to defeat him, which is, like I said, extremely difficult in these optional scenarios, you're rewarded with cool stuff. So that's the perfect way to handle it.
It's how a Big Daddy fight should be in BioShock, of a risk versus reward. Like, I'm going to use a ton of ammo, a ton of healing items, but I'm going to get Adam.
The only difference is that Big Daddies become extremely easy by the end of the game. And even by the end of Resident Evil 3, Nemesis is still a problem. Like, it depends what your arena is like. It depends what kind of guns you have. I mean, of course,
Get him
near
stuck
the
in
end.
a corner or not.
Yes. There's a lot of cheese. Do the cheese if you can, if you decide to fight him. But it kind of depends what ammo and stuff you have. But he's still a problem.
I love the one when he jumps into the police station through the window by the staircase.
Oh my God.
That's my
insane.
favorite
Yeah,
Nemesis encounter. It's
that's
so
like-
awesome.
Gotta be the scariest moment in the game too.
When you're like, okay, I haven't seen him in, because you've only seen him once at that point.
Yeah, outside the police station.
Which I like how everything I like is more this game than the remake. But like the first time you see Nemesis is after Brad catches you in that bar being like, have you seen this thing?
Yeah.
He's literally hunting STARS members.
Yeah.
And that's where like, and also Nemesis just feels so like silly. Like the Umbrella made this monster to literally hunt 6 people in the city of
Yeah.
like hundreds, thousands of people.
Yeah.
But like the remake tries to take itself more seriously, which I don't appreciate.
It's kind of weird how it does it because like it's so clearly goofy and it doesn't realize it. Like with
It
maybe
doesn't
it
know
does-
what tone it's going for.
they kind of make Jill into what Leon is in Resident Evil 4, where she's just like action, crazy one-liners, goofy stuff like that. Don't like what they did with her, but I guess maybe that's more appropriate to the kind of game that they were making, which is over-the-top action game.
And like I said, RE3 Remake is fun and it's cool and it's a fun 5-hour romp, but it's not something I think about ever. Where Nemesis, I think about at least weekly of how insane and stupid the game is, but in a fun way.
Yeah, it's very unique and awesome. So it's just, in it being the most unique PS1 game, it's unusual that it's the one that got skimped out on for the remake treatment.
It also has, because at the time they were making Code Veronica as well as they were making Nemesis, because Code Veronica was supposed to be RE3, and the development time went so long on it. That's why Shinji Mikami didn't direct RE3. Was he was doing Code Veronica. So by the time Code Veronica was so far behind and this game was being made, Jill wasn't the main character. It was just another character in Raccoon City. So they're like, put a main Resident Evil character in it, and put a 3 on it. So we can have, on the PS1, a trilogy of Resident Evil games. So it probably had a much smaller budget than RE2 and Code Veronica, smaller team, smaller dev cycle, and it's the most like interesting and creative Resident Evil game, other than obviously like, the creativity of the first game being the first of its kind. But like it's more creative and fun feeling than like RE2 does, which feels like the next evolution, very like safe sequel to RE1, just stepping up in the action. But RE3 takes so many liberties and so many risks, and it mostly pulls it off.
Of the ones to revisit, there's still a reason to play Resident Evil 3 on the PS1.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the one. If there's one to be like, you got to play the original, it's 3.
Yeah.
Because even though RE1 is great, the remake almost makes it like you could just play that one. Yeah. RE2 is 2 different, very solid games, where RE3 is like you have a really good PS1 game and like a fine, forgettable action game on PS3 or PS4 and Xbox One. So it's like you should really play this one. If not over the remake, play both of them so you can see what the difference is between the two to get the full experience.
I think I played them in the right order, which is backwards, just because I wasn't able to be super disappointed in not seeing Gravedigger.
The reason that Mikami wasn't making Nemesis was he was making the original Resident Evil 3, Code Veronica.
What's that?
Resident Evil.
I know you haven't played it, so I'll just kind of hit on my key points on Code Veronica, which I think it's obscenely overrated. I actively do not.
And
like
it doesn't
Code
even
Veronica.
have that high of a rating, and you still think it's overrated.
I do. Well, like if you talk to a lot of like
old
basically
heads.
if you look at like Resident Evil fan groups, like I'm in several of them on Facebook. Code Veronica is one that is very commonly referred to as one of the best. It's the last bastion of that kind of style, even though RE Remake and Zero came out after.
It's not brought up very often, and it's not in common gamer knowledge, which is why I think it's a fun game to idolize for you Resident Evil old heads, maybe.
Yeah.
To just be like, it's this unknown relic, it's unknown gem that nobody knows about. This is the real good one. I think it's just a fun, appealing game to say that it is.
And it's technically RE3.
Yeah.
Which, story-wise, Code Veronica is very important to the overall arc of Resident Evil 3, or Resident Evil as a whole, because basically RE5 is like a sequel to Code Veronica in a way. Mm-hmm. Like there's a lot of stuff that happens in Code Veronica, because RE4 doesn't, it's like its own world, where 5 really takes back to like, that's when Wesker and Chris fight a ton, is in Code Veronica and stuff like that. That's when you see Wesker as like, because if you only play the numbered entries, you see Wesker die, spoiler alert, in Resident Evil 1. You don't see him again unless you play 0 in cutscenes. You don't see him in 2, 3. You see him in 4 a little bit in like separate ways. Like you see him on the codec calls with Ada.
Yeah, he's like,
it's like Ada's boss.
Good, thank you for bringing it to me. Yes.
And then in 5, he's a supervillain.
He's a vampire. He's crazy man.
He's like Vamp from Metal Gear Solid. Yeah. Like, what happened to Albert Wesker? Where if you play Code Veronica,
I actually do not know the answer to this. So I
if
really
you play,
have no idea
like
what
it doesn't go over like, oh, this is when Albert Wesker. But like they do, like, you see him as that version in Code Veronica, but it's not ridiculous like it is in 5. But it's super over the top, like almost like anime style ridiculousness in Code Veronica. The game's like 20 hours long. It's the longest Resident Evil game, right up there with 6. Like, it's ridiculous. But like, there are some, and this is where modern gaming, I think, would have helped Code Veronica a lot, because there are a lot of issues with it that I think could have been fixed with patches, where like there's a point in the game where you switch characters. So I'm just going to tell you, you play as Chris Redfield.
He's on the cover.
And
I did figure that.
You play as Claire. The game is billed as you play as Claire, but you also play as Chris, because Chris is looking for Claire, because in RE2, Claire's looking for Chris, so it swaps.
Oh, that's fun. I never thought about that like that.
That when you swap, whatever Claire was holding, that's Claire's now.
Yeah.
Now you're playing as Chris, but you're playing with the same item box between the two characters.
Yeah.
So let's say there's an item that you need as Chris.
Ooh.
I hope before the game unknowingly swapped you to Chris, that you as Claire put that item in that box. Because if you need it again, you have to go 100 miles out of the way
To find her?
to find another one of those items. So in the case of Resident Evil Code Veronica, you need a fire extinguisher. This is like the famous thing in Code Veronica. You need a fire extinguisher to put fire out in this hallway to go fight a boss. If you did not put that in that box as Claire, you added 2 hours to your experience. It's so annoying.
Okay, here's my question. Number one, does the game tell you when you are going to be switching?
No.
So it's just like a cutscene thing happens and then you're... number two is, are all key items duplicated like that?
No, I mean, there's not a lot of items that like a door that you would get the key to as Claire and then you go as Chris to open it or whatever. This is like one of the rare instances because there are areas that both characters like don't go to. Like there's like a section that Claire goes to that Chris doesn't touch at all. Like there's a lot of that too. But also the art style for Code Veronica, I think looks horrible. Like it aged so bad where I think this game looks great still. I think a lot of the PS1 like really like bad looking like PS1 graphics, I think they age really well.
Yeah.
Especially RE2 and 3. Maybe not 1 as much, but 2 and 3 look great. Code Veronica has this like cartoony look to it that at the time I'm sure it looked great. But oh my god.
It might be a relic of it being a Dreamcast game perhaps. Like
That
maybe
too.
the lighting is just kind of funky
The
cuz
characters look very like soft. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the textures look very soft and the lighting is really weird and the game is also like very in its writing and everything is super over the top, kind of like 5 style, but not. It's like 5 walks a fine line of like being serious but also being stupid. And RE4 I think does an even much better job of that.
Yeah.
Where Code Veronica is just over the top insanity stupid.
well,
which
they were
is
trying
fun.
trying something new for that.
And I give him credit. And I think that was Shinji Mikami's project during Nemesis. And that's the one Shinji Resident Evil game that I am like, I don't get it, man. And I'll be honest, I'd pick, if I were to play a Resident Evil game right now and you handed me Code Veronica X and Resident Evil Survivor, I think I'd play Survivor.
Resident Evil Survivor.
Not only because it's like 2 hours long,
Oh, right.
but because of how like silly it is. And like clearly it was made by people who like kind of get it, but they were given like it's more like Time Crisis or something than it is
maybe
Resident Evil.
it gels with its own design
Incompetence.
better. Sure. Yeah.
It's like it's so bad that it has like
It
an
loops back
appeal
around.
to
Yeah,
it. It has a quirk to it.
I
That's
totally
fun.
get
And
that.
I really respect Survivor where it gets so panned online of just being the worst game ever. But I've beat it multiple times. And that game, unlike Resident Evil 3 Remake, has branching storyline moments of do I go through the arcade or do I go through the church? Is it very different? Not really, but it's kind of cool. It gives replay value. There's certain weapons that are exclusive to certain routes. So if you want the best weapon, you got to go a certain way, which is also ridiculous because if you walk through a door and you miss the shotgun's gone because you can't backtrack in Resident Evil Survivor.
That's the first person
Yeah.
one where your head is like across a crosshair that you're just...
You go into aim mode,
that's
and then
what it
there's
is.
a cursor that you control on the screen. It's so bad. Well, you have to give some grace to the game a little bit because it was supposed to launch with a gun con for PS1,
Oh,
but
I
it
didn't
came
know.
out, or it was supposed to come out like the month after 9/11. So they delayed the game,
Yeah.
took the gun out. Or no, it wasn't 9/11. It was Columbine school
That's-
shooting.
yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't 9/11. That they were like, maybe we shouldn't launch a game with a gun included.
Well, did Gun Survivor exist already at that point?
No, Survivor's the first of the Gun Survivor series.
Oh, in Japan, is it called Gun Survivor?
I believe so. Yes, it is because there's
Biohazard
Gun
Gun
Survivor
Survivor.
2, which is basically Code Veronica mixed with Nemesis somehow. That's the arcade game we played.
Yeah.
That's Gun Survivor 2. And then there's Gun Survivor 3, which is Dino Crisis themed.
Yeah, that's all.
Which is
that's a
Dino
whole-
Stalker in the US.
Yes, that's a whole.
That's a whole other
thing.
rabbit hole of terrible games.
Well, except for Dino Crisis.
Well, right.
I mean, if you like Resident Evil 1, which you should,
Which is the correct opinion to have.
then play Dino Crisis. It's Resident Evil with dinosaurs, which That's the only pitch that you really need. It's not as good as Resident Evil 1, but it's still extremely awesome.
And it's made by the same person, which is also worth noting, that Shinji Mikami directed.
Oh, I
Dino
forgot about that.
Crisis.
Yeah, right.
So it's like, it's not even like imagine if they made something like this. No, it's literally the guy who made Resident Evil made that game again, but with dinosaurs. And it is really good. And I have the hottest take probably of this episode, which is Dino Crisis 2 is better than Dino Crisis 1. And it's so fun. It's so good.
I did not know it was as good as it was until I played it at your place.
Yeah, Dino Crisis 2 is like a time attack shooter. Like, but it's still fixed camera angles. You still play as Regina, I think.
That sounds right.
Yeah. You still play as her, and there's like another character you play as, but the story's super fun. The gameplay is so much fun. It's like a score attack kind of game that it's just like, it never gets old. By the end, I was like, that was awesome. And it's like, it's short enough that it doesn't overstay its welcome. It incentivizes replay value. Not holding anything against Dino Crisis 1, but Dino Crisis 2 is just so much fun to play.
Yeah, but it is a completely different style of game. So
yeah,
if
it's hard to compare the
like,
two, but
yeah, so if you are like specifically looking for Resident Evil style games, you're going to want to play
Dino Crisis 1. And then Dino Crisis 3 we don't talk about because it's like
doesn't
absolutely terrible.
Resident Evil Survivor.
Mm-hmm.
GOAT on PS1? Best game on PS1? Is that what you're saying?
Better than Final Fantasy VII.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Yeah, that's not hot at all.
That's my cold take on this episode.
The one game that I keep in my brain saying, don't forget to talk about this, is Resident Evil 0.
Resident Evil 0.
Maybe a little more overlooked than it should be. I'm not saying it's over, or I'm not saying it's underrated, because it's probably not. Maybe a little more because it's completely overshadowed by Resident Evil 1 remake.
Deservedly.
Yes. But it's still like this is the case of Dino Crisis, where it's like, if you want more Resident Evil, it's more Resident Evil.
And it's the last tank control Resident Evil too. So it's like, if you want to look at that, it's the final evolution of tank control Resident Evil games.
Yeah, it is the last of its kind, I guess.
And I feel the same way about it as I do 3, Nemesis, which, although I don't look at it nearly as the same positive light as I do 3, but it's very experimental. It feels like another team that was told, make a Resident Evil game. You're not held on to by the past. Do it your own way. There's the 2-character kind of co-op-y system where you're controlling both characters at the same time. There are, which I think is the worst decision of the game, which sounds great on paper, is the no item box in the game.
Yeah.
Which on paper, you're like, finally, I don't have to just go back to the item box every time I need to drop something. But since there's not an item box, they're not connected in any way. So if I drop an item in this room and I go outside and I need that item again, I can't go to the item box that's outside. I have to come all the way back down here to get it.
Yep.
Which is so annoying, especially when you move on to new environments. Because people play the game like you're playing as Billy because he can take more damage, and then have Rebecca just as your item mule that follows you around.
Yeah, that's just sad.
But then they make it interesting by making it that certain sections can only be accessed by Rebecca, and it splits you up in interesting ways that makes you utilize each character to their strengths and weaknesses.
I love you mentioning leaving items, because I think what happens it's probably going to inevitably happen to anybody that plays the game is you're going to have an item room, which I think is a room that'll have a typewriter in it, and kind of something that's centrally located or whatever, where you go into the room, it takes a little while to load because you've just got so many glittery objects that are sitting everywhere. Like, this is my corner where I set all of my grenade launcher ammo, and this is where I put all my key items and just throw them all on the floor.
I can picture all of my little, basically, item box rooms in my head. Like the one I think of all the time is in the training facility with the typewriter at the bottom of the stairs that has the statue puzzle at the top of the stairs.
Sure.
With the painting at the top of the stairs that opens up.
Training facility. Sure.
This guy is the Resident Evil 0 defender guy who's like, oh, Leech Hunter is so good. And it's just,
I never said
you
that.
do say that.
I said it's not terrible.
It is terrible. And like this throwaway mode, the amount of times this man has brought up Leech Hunter is unproportionate to the rest of the universe talking about Leech Hunter. But anyway, there's a lot to love about Zero, even though there's some canon stuff that it, again, do I really care about the story of Resident Evil? It's not like, the story of like Metal Gear Solid that
where it actually would matter.
Yeah,
like the game is about the story.
Right, where Resident Evil 0 making some things not make sense. Like, oh, Albert Wesker and William Birkin are like best friends that are like watching Rebecca Chambers and Billy Cohen. These two people. Well, he obviously knows who Rebecca is based on his drawer in Resident Evil 2, having a picture of her as a cheerleader.
Nice.
But like, there's so much of like, why are these things lining up? And like, the biggest thing I thought about this like a week ago. Like, oh, I got to bring this up. I can't believe it actually is coming up for Zero. Is if you play especially Resident Evil 2 Remake, you realize where, in relation to things, where the RPD is to where the Umbrella Hive facility is. In Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 0, you go to a section that is Resident Evil from Resident Evil 2, the original, and it looks awesome, like totally redone in 2002 graphics, which looks great. But you end up leaving that facility where you fight the Queen Leech at the end, and then you like go up the hill, and there's the Spencer Mansion, and it's like whoa.
Oh yeah.
The Raccoon City lab is under Raccoon City. The Arcalay Mountains are like miles away. Like how? Like it doesn't really make sense.
There's a really long tunnel that.
Well, you do go on a train ride in RE2, but it's like there's no way that this all lines up like in the canon of where things are supposed to be. But that's like digging in like my brain of trying to pick apart things with the canon. But if you look past that and you look at it as a fun GameCube survival horror game, I think Zero is really good. It's hard when you compare it to the other games of its caliber, like Resident Evil Remake, that it's not even close to as good. But it has a lot of fun ideas. I don't really like the leech enemies. They're kind of annoying.
The leech enemies?
Well, you fight leeches and stuff. That's like the whole cusp of the game is leeches.
Yeah, that's right.
Which it's like, how does Rebecca not bring up when Chris saves her? Oh, by the way, I just went through this crazy thing.
Yes.
And it's like, oh, where's the rest of Bravo team? They got eaten by leeches on a train. Obviously, the answer is, well, Zero wasn't made when they made the original game.
Well, they should have at least taken that into account.
Like, Billy's like, don't you ever talk about anything that happened. And she's like, okay. Yeah. Although she does, they radio her like, have you seen Billy Cohen? And she's like, nope. I don't know where he is.
Right.
And then they salute. And that's the last time you ever see Billy Cohen.
Well, I mean, he is a wanted fugitive, so I mean,
he's just out. You can assume he dies in the Raccoon City incident. Like, that's a safe assumption.
Game is basically just Resident Evil Remake, except not as good in pretty much every area.
Mm-hmm. And some interesting, like, creative choices that make it totally unique to any other game in the franchise.
Yeah.
Imagine being a loyal PlayStation gamer and being like, I love RE1, I love RE2, I love RE3, I played RE Survivor, I'm ready for something new. And then you look over at the GameCube and they get Resident Evil 4, they get Resident Evil Remake, they get Resident Evil 0, and you get Code Veronica, which a lot of people like, but you get Outbreak File 2, and Dead Aim for being a loyal PlayStation fan.
There you go. Well, I think it's maybe, it's obviously the deal that Capcom had with Nintendo for whatever reason. I don't even know why, because PS2 was popping off, and
it must have been a huge financial deal with Nintendo where they're like, we'll pay you anything. Yes. Just give us the good stuff, because no one wants to work with us because PlayStation 2 sold 5 consoles for every one we sold.
Yeah, right. Yeah, if you want more Resident Evil, it's more Resident Evil.
Mm-hmm.
It's authentically Resident Evil. So
and the remaster of it's great too.
Okay, so what is Dead Aim?
The worst Resident Evil game.
What?
You can kind of see the DNA of Resident Evil 4 in it in a cool way, where the game has over-the-shoulder mechanics. It tries to do what RE4 does, but it does such a bad job of, like, when you go to aim, it goes to first person, Survivor style of the cursor on the screen. It takes place in one central location, which is our consensus of that's the coolest way to do a Resident Evil game. It takes place on a boat, Revelation style.
I was going to say.
I feel like the Resident Evil games feel lazy when they're like, and there's the new virus that is exclusive to this game, like the T-Abyss virus from Revelations, or the there's like a fear virus in Revelations 2.
The C virus in 6.
Exactly. And that's a mainline title. But like at that point with like Resident Evil 4 and 5, like they go a totally different direction, like with Ouroboros or the Las Plagas and stuff like that.
So
but
it's its own
being
thing.
like, here's the same thing again, but we're calling it something different.
Yeah, different letter of the alphabet.
There's not a lot of actual like exploration that has any meaning to it. It feels very bare bones, very like, even though like an environment can be large, it can feel empty. There's stuff in Dead Aim that you can tell may have driven decisions into Resident Evil 4, but it's the most bare bones version of what you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
Clearly Capcom was like, hey, Christmas is coming up.
Yeah.
We need another Resident Evil game. Can you guys whip something up?
Yeah.
They're like, sure. And they threw out in 2 months Dead Aim, and it's absolutely terrible. I think that game does have GunCon support, I think. But you're still controlling it with the controller. So you're walking around, and then you enter gun mode, and then you shoot, and now you're
I actually
walking
think the gun cons have a stick on them. Yeah.
Oh, it's probably really good. So play it that way. But I don't know. I mean, Dead Aim is embarrassing. And that's one I beat in one sitting. And when I beat it, I got up and I'm like, I am never touching this game again. And like doing the final boss, like, you know, when like you're just trying to beat something.
Yep.
And you know you're making
just want to be
mistakes
done.
where it's like, I know there's items over there I could get, but I just want to move on.
Yeah.
And then like
just
I
trying
got
to
to the final
brute
boss.
force your way through
Exactly. And I get to the final boss and I'm like, I don't have enough ammo for this thing. And I'm like, just over and over, like, I just gotta beat it. And when I beat it, I'm like, disc out on the shelf. Bye. Never again.
Frisbee threw it back onto the shelf, into the case.
Yeah,
it closes.
I had the case open, ready to catch
Yep.
it, and never to be opened. I probably haven't opened it since. Other than that, anything else would just be like Resident Evil Gaiden. Like, like
Yeah,
what
no,
else
that
is there
stuff
to
doesn't
say,
matter.
you know?
Okay, well then I guess we can close it out. That's kind of a brief look at more of the classic, I guess, considered. Well, I guess Resident Evil 4 is considered classic now. I mean, in our brains, it's still like, it's a newer-ish game, but it's not anymore.
Oh, it's 20 years old this year.
Yeah, that's
which is insane.
crazy.
It's over 20 years old now because it was January of 2005.
Of the games we discussed, I think, obviously, Resident Evil 1 Remake is goated. Like I said, strong contender for greatest game of all time. I think it's probably one of the most well-designed games of all time. Resident Evil Remake is the game that you and I, besides Resident Evil 4, have played the most together.
Oh, for sure.
And I think that's kind of the one that we kind of were trying each other out on, because at that point I had never played it. So I played it, I think when the Origins collection came out on PS4, I just bought it new, or however I got it. Maybe I borrowed it from you because I never buy games
Probably.
new.
Sounds like the leech.
Yes, I'm
ironically
I'm
getting the leech hunter.
I am the leech.
And I'm the leech hunter.
Yeah. So loved Resident Evil 1 Remake, and then we just kind of played it, and we just never stopped playing it for like an entire summer.
Yeah, we got to a point where I think you would start the game, like we in our speedrun co-op runs.
Yeah.
You would start the game and get to the guardhouse, and then I would play the entire guardhouse section. Come back, you would have the mansion again, and then I would handle like the rest of the game after the mansion.
Or something
it
like
may
that.
have been flip-flopped from that, but
where we had it structured out.
We had a point of like one of us is running and the next one's ready. Once you get to a certain door, it's like, all right, go.
Yeah.
And we got some good speedrun times.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, but we just were pounding through that game over and over again, like beating it multiple times in a day. And I think that unless we're just a little more psychotic than most people, which is probably true, that speaks to the power of that game and how good it really is, that it's just fun to gamify the game, where it's more than what it is on the box. You know, it's tightening it up, and it's like, oh man, that was a good one. I want to try and do it better next time, kind of thing.
And RE4 is the same. How many franchises are there that have more than one like masterpiece in it, like the way Resident Evil does?
To be able to say that it is arguably could be the greatest game of all time, and Resident Evil has at least two of those.
The fact that Resident Evil has so many, at least for us, I mean, there are a lot of people who don't like 7 and stuff like that, but like that there are so many games in the franchise that are like top of the genre, top of the generation that it's in, and things like that. But it also has some really bad games in it too.
Sure
it has such
does.
a wide breadth of different games in that franchise.
Very interesting, fun franchise. Next time, we're talking about the big dog.
The big cojones.
Resident Evil 4. It's going to be difficult to not just like talk endlessly about it. So we're going to have to like figure out how to discuss it because it's just like, it's our game. And it's funny because growing up, I was the Resident Evil 4, well, not growing up, but in my teenage years, I was the Resident Evil 4 guy, and I told Graham about it, and I told Kyle about it, and I just was like spreading the word.
Yeah.
Like,
and you come to me like, oh, have you ever? And I'm like, have I ever?
That's right.
And then that's when we knew. And Resident Evil 4 has become a part of my personality. I got my Resident Evil 4 tattoo.
There you go.
I would say I've probably beat Resident Evil 4 safely 40 times would be my guess.
Absolutely. Across several games. We got it on the Wii, we got it on the GameCube, PS2, PS3, PS4, Xbox.
And we haven't even talked about the remake.
No, we haven't.
Which is
just
as good, which we will talk about. And that's why Resident Evil 4 is getting its own episode.
That's why.
It would not fit into any other episode
but
on its own.
The cream of the crop of this episode, Resident Evil 1 remake. Ben and I have corresponding tattoos for Resident Evil 1
remake. And then we found out it's also in Resident Evil 2. Remember?
Oh yeah,
in the
right.
sewer.
That's right. But it's
when you're yeah, sure. This is
that.
not a Resident Evil 2 tattoo.
No, it's not. People come up to me all the time. They're like, "Is that Resident Evil 2?"
Is that when
like,
he plays Leon in the sewer?
No,
because I swear he had that.
No, which is like, who tossed the medallions from Resident Evil 1 flushed them down the toilet?
That could be a whole nother conversation.
But there they are. Next time, Resident Evil 4. Thanks for hanging out with us. See you later.
See you next time.